Hi, Saul. I am so excited to have some time with you today. As you know, we've known each other a very, very long time. And of course, we're kind of, I don't want to use the word dinosaur, but we're close in terms of the real estate industry. Been around a long time, seen an awful lot. And I wanted to spend some time with you today because I know your knowledge and I know mine, and I think we need to share that a little bit broader because we've got a lot going on in the industry right now. Things that are unusual that I haven't. I did some of it I didn't ever expect to see, but yet at the same time not surprised by. So I have a few questions for you. The first one I want to ask is I'd like to know your thoughts on the issue of commission compression. As you know, I'm a trainer. I teach ABR a lot. I talk about our broker agreements, and I just like to have your thoughts on the issue nationally of compression on commissions overall.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here. It's great to see you. It's always
Oh,
nice to talk to you. We not only we've known each other for years, we've actually sat on boards of directors together.
right, we've served
Right.
together. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so we've got this history where we've seen lots of things take place in the industry. So I wouldn't say we're dinosaurs.
Well, we're
I would
close.
say I would say that we were part of the evolution that evolved from the dinosaur.
That's that sounds so much better. You're so much better than I am.
So no, you asked this great question about commission compression. We've been talking about this for at least 30 years, and what I always refer to it as downward pressure on commission. Right? There's this downward, and different entities, different brokerage models for years have come out because compensation is a way to differentiate.
Right,
Right? You know, Seth Godin says, "Be different or charge less."
right,
Be different or charge less. So as a realtor, we both taught people for years you have to create that compelling argument,
right.
and you have to be able to substantiate what you charge. So there have been people that have thought the best way to be competitive in the real estate industry is through fees. Some people believe that. Some people believe there are other ways. And I won't mention, we've had different companies come into the industry over the years that have tried this lower commission, and some are successful and some are not. Now, at the same time, you have had the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice thinking, you know what, you've got all this technology, all these things have happened, it should be easier to transact real estate, and yet real estate commissions haven't changed very much.
Mm.
And then they look at it across the world, which I know is not a good analogy, but that doesn't matter. The Department of Justice looks at, and they say, look, at the commissions are lower in other parts of the world. And how come your commissions here always stay about the same? We, the Department of Justice, believe that this must be some sort of price fixing. And so we're being attacked again as an industry. But there is this pressure. It's coming from the DOJ. It's coming from the FTC. It's coming from brokerage models that charge less because they use that as a competitive edge.
Mhm.
It's out there. But here's the big thing I think people don't think about very often. In the world of technology, we often hear that the objectives are to take the friction out of the transaction. Have you ever heard that?
Mhm.
I'm going to take the friction out of the transaction. Now, as a side note, in my mind, that's what a realtor does. Isn't that what a realtor does? You take the
Yeah,
friction out of the transaction.
absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
so now we're talking about technology taking the friction out of the transaction. What does that really mean? Well, if the friction point, I think the friction point is where human beings are involved. That's always where things get slowed down.
Mhm.
So right now, in the sale of a piece of real estate, once a property is listed, there might be 3, 4, 5 people that touch that transaction folder, and then there's the loan folders, and then after it closes, people have to touch that before that loan is purchased and serviced in the secondary money market. And so what we've got is lots of people touching a real estate transaction. And technology, what it does, it removes the need to touch as many people. And if you're removing people from that food chain, what should be a result? And the answer is fees should come down.
Right, right.
And so we're seeing this conversation. We're seeing people using lower commissions as a competitive edge. And once again, we're seeing the Department of Justice
Mhm.
going after the National Association of Realtors for a number of things, and MLSs and brokerage firms. And so when you talk about, and I don't know if I answered your question or not,
No, you
this
did, but
compression, there is,
there
and there
is,
will be.
but what you did, Saul, it kind of brings me to the next question because, again, we go back to the days of sub-agency before fiduciary responsibilities. One of my mantras as a trainer and as a realtor is if we don't do a good job of explaining what we do, then we're not then commission should go down. Because if we don't tell people our value, that's a failure. But your commentary brought me to the lawsuit. We know that there's a lawsuit. It's a class, is, I believe it has a class, right? Is it class action?
Well, that's one of the attempts right now.
Okay, can you talk a tiny bit about that, please?
Yeah. So first of all, there's a number of lawsuits.
Okay,
And the one of the big ones was the Department of Justice against the National Association of Realtors, filed in either 2018 or 2019 or 2020. Let me give you the history of this. The attempts by the FTC and the DOJ to attack the real estate industry is not new, as you know. And back in, and so it's been going on for a while. Pre-1976, that's when the conversations about agency took place. So you're right. We used to be, our MLS was an offer of sub-agency,
correct.
where everybody worked for the seller because the
nobody
seller
knew
signed,
But nobody knew it. I mean,
but nobody knew it. So not only did they not know it, right? They didn't know. So buyers were saying to realtors, who the realtor, and even realtors didn't know it often,
that's
that they
exactly
were
right.
right. They're a member of the MLS. The broker is a participant or a subscriber to the MLS or participant in the MLS. And then all the agents join the MLS, and the broker is an agent of the seller. And then it was a sub-agency model. Anybody that wanted to sell that broker's listing became a sub-agent of the seller, because that's what the MLS rules stated.
Exactly right.
And
Yep.
so agents would go out, talk to buyers. The buyer would say, hey, I'm going to offer this, but I'm willing to pay this. Well, if you're telling that to the seller's agent, yeah, there's something wrong. So there was this great dispute. There was legislation proposed. The California Association of Realtors worked real hard to stop the outlawing of dual agency, and the result was agency disclosure.
Right.
And then so the agency disclosure was created to kind of move away from this sub-agency model.
Right.
And then we had in the real estate industry in the 1986, 88 timeframe, those agency disclosure laws.
Right.
And what those laws did was they made an agent disclose who they represented. Well, their agents didn't know they represented the seller, so they were telling the buyers they represented them when they really represented the seller. That creates a divided agency. That could be great penalties. CAR understood that, NAR understood that. And in 1992, they changed the rules of the MLS from being an offer of sub-agency, a unilateral offer of sub-agency, to an offer of compensation. So the change in 1992 changed the MLS from a unilateral offer of sub-agency to an offer of compensation.
But
and so
I need to interject something here. What I remember, because I was practicing in Connecticut in those days, what I remember is that was the first time we saw $1 offer of buyer compensation, zero offers of compensation, sellers saying, I'm not going to pay them, they don't work for me. Now, of course, me being the New Yorker person I am, used to say, yeah, but you didn't know that before anyway, so what's the point? And it was just a battle. And I see this glimmer of similarity today with what we're dealing with.
Well, so that's exactly right. So now we've got the situation where the MLS, through the NAR rules, a lot of people don't understand the structure of MLS. MLSs are separately owned and operated. They're separate entities. Those that agree to follow the guidelines proposed by the National Association of Realtors then are eligible for errors and omission insurance.
Right.
Which is very valuable, because if there are lawsuits against MLSs, which there are often, as a matter of fact, you've probably seen it, NAR's got the best record of this. It's a 3-volume set. Here's 2 volumes on antitrust in the real estate industry. Pages and pages and pages of antitrust lawsuits in the real estate industry. And so, that continues. And we now see these cases, and I'll talk about 3 separate and distinct ones. So the first one is, let me go back again. In the early 2000s, we had disputes about who owned the data in the MLS.
Oh, yeah.
Where should it go? Where can it be displayed? Can you advertise all this conversation? And the Department of Justice went after NAR, and there was great conversations. I remember meeting with Lori Janik and NAR counsel in Chicago when I was there one week to talk to them about this. And so there was this settlement in 2008. And it was about being able to use the MLS data, brokers being able to use to create virtual office websites. BOWs. And so there was 10-year settlement. So for 10 years, there was no bother of the real estate industry by the Department of Justice. At the end of the 10 years, immediately at the end of the 10 years, within a 2-year period, so 2018, it's 2008 to 2018. In 2018, the Federal Trade Commission, Department of Justice, they held 2 hearings. And those 2 hearings were pointing against the MLS. And then in late 2019, 2020, the Department of Justice sued NAR. There's this lawsuit suing NAR. Now, NAR is smart, like they always do, to say, hey, hold it. Before we go to court, let's see if we can settle this. Let's see if we can figure this out. So the Department of Justice, they said, sure, let's talk about it. And NAR agreed with everything that the Department of Justice was indicating. They said, okay, without admitting any guilt, we'll accept this, we'll accept this, we'll accept this, we'll accept this. So, right, so the Department of Justice got what they wanted out of NAR. They were ready to, there's a proposal stipulation that this lawsuit would go away. But then what happened on July 8th, is the Department of Justice, remember, this is a lawsuit, the United States versus the National Association, that settlement, DOJ backed out of the settlement.
I saw that.
And the next day, the White House issued an executive order, 5,000, 7,000 word executive order that indicated that the federal government and the executive branch was going to utilize the full power of administrative law and the executive branch of government to make the world more competitive.
And I have that paper. I have read that paper.
Well, here's the interesting. We believe that that real estate's a very competitive business.
We do.
You and I do, right? But the Department of Justice doesn't. And so now the administration, and this administration seems to me they've figured out that the best way to utilize the powerful tools of government, let's not forget how powerful. We're talking about the Department of Justice. We're talking about the Federal Trade Commission. We're talking about the Internal Revenue. You know how strong the Internal Revenue Service is? They can screw your life up for a long time. And so all of these forces, the White House told us they're going to use all of these forces to do what they want to do. And it's telling that the settlement, right, that the DOJ pulled out of the settlement the day before. And I can send you a link to a very interesting podcast interviewing the person that heads up this Council of Economic Advisors for the administration.
Do me a favor. I will add that to remember I shared with you as I end this, and I'm recording us, so I'm going to be posting. Send that link to me and I'll add it to the final piece when I finalize the video. It's
fascinating. This guy, and I can't remember his name offhand, but he is the guy running this committee for the president, for the administration. And this guy, he talks faster than me about all of this stuff. So I listen, I go, he knows the issues. And he knows where you go to get help, and he knows how you can fight this. And what a lot of people don't realize is that issues the government has with the real estate industry are not new.
No.
That just you have changes of administrations over the years, priorities shift over the years, and so certain things just kind of hibernate for a while.
Right.
And so now we've got the real estate industry as a target again. So let's go back to these cases. One case is a very distinct case, Department of Justice against NAR, and they were going to settle and they pulled back. And one of the reasons they might have pulled back is there are also civil cases. And this is important. The big civil case being the Moeller, M-O-E-H-L-R, the Moeller case. And there's lots of great information about this, but basically this case challenges the offer of compensation.
Right.
It says that the offer, remember, which was something that was brought in when we went from unilateral offer of sub-agency. It was a solution.
That's right.
It was a solution.
That's exactly right.
And so the solution now is being gone after, and it's a civil case. And so it's interesting, civil cases, because they're going to push for class action status. And really the bottom line is what they're saying is the broker compensation clause violates the, if not the letter of the law, the intent, and it's price fixing, because all commissions are negotiable, and yet buyers can't negotiate because it's just kind of fixed. Now, how often do you think the agents representing the buyer actually say to the buyer, we can negotiate the commission on the other side? They don't say that. And so the Department of Justice is saying that's never done. You don't do that. So basically what you've done is you've taken away the right of buyers. And now this is the civil case. They're saying you've taken away the right of buyers to negotiate. And so a buyer of a piece of real estate. Moeller is suing and is suing the National Association of Realtors, a number of big MLSs, and the big brokerage entities. They're all named as co-conspirators.
Conspirators.
And co-conspirators, and they're going to go. When we look at this, you think of a civil case, and in this case, an antitrust case. Then you can have triple damages.
Yep.
And the damages they're going after are the last 4 years of commissions. How many brokers you think could pull up 1% or 2% or 3% of the last 4 years of commissions, if they, or MLSs or associations that could actually do that if a judge found that the compensation clause violates the antitrust law? So that's a big civil case. The Department of Justice has kind of backed off. That civil case will now proceed. A lot of people laugh at this and they say, they'll never get anywhere. It's a competitive business. But as I look at it, and I would bet, Jenny, if you and I looked at it together and talked about it, we would say, you know what? I can see how somebody would try to make this case. And you know what? It might be that the plaintiff actually is successful. That could happen. And if that happened, what would it do to brokerage firms? What would it do to MLSs? What would it do to associations? And so I think this is an important issue. People need to be paying attention. Now, once that Moeller case was filed, and I can give you some information on that, there were 3 other copycat lawsuits filed. Mm-hmm. And there's a number of different accusations, but I think the big one is the one that says the MLS guideline that says it's an offer of compensation takes away the buyer's right to negotiate, and that's a violation of antitrust. And whether or not they prevail, that's what's going on. In my mind, as I look at it, I think that depends on how good the attorneys are at this and who they call as expert witnesses. But I think they could actually make a case for the fact that the Moeller plaintiff is actually correct, that there is and whether or not the punishment will fit the crime, I don't know. But there is some barrier to a buyer being able to negotiate a commission under the current structure of MLS. But you know, and I know.
I apologize, Saul. That takes me to the the next question, and that's the issue of buyer broker agreements. That's the issue where, and that's been my mantra, and I've been teaching a lot. I've been doing the ABR a lot, and what you just shared takes me to that place of, but we have a document, and the buyer and the agent for the buyer sit down together and have conversation about that document. Would that be any level of insulation? I don't want to use protection because that's almost too big a word for this, but would that create any insulation for what we're seeing here?
Interesting. I was talking to my friend John Riley, who's a real estate attorney for many years. Just yesterday, we were talking about this situation. And so if the claim is that there's no way that the NAR set this up so there's no way, and the local association and MLSs have set this up so there's no way for buyers to negotiate, that's not true. There is a way.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, our entities, and they should use this as their own defense, part of their defense, our entities created the documents to where, and this is really the question, if there were no buyer compensation clause in the MLS rules, is there still a way to ensure compensation? And you know, and I know the answer is yes. It can be done through a buyer broker agreement, which the industry created 20 or so years ago, but less than 10% of the agents use it. Yeah. And you and I know that, and they're afraid to use it, and they're afraid to ask somebody to sign something that no one else asks them to sign. A lot of them think an agency disclosure is the same thing as a buyer agency. It's not. But that buyer, and I'm not an expert on buyer agency contract or on buyer brokerage contracts anymore. I once was. But in my mind, that's the way to secure your commission in the absence of a broker compensation clause in the MLS. And you can tell me if I'm right or not.
No, you're completely correct. And I teach, in fact, I taught it in Albuquerque. Of course, I've taught it here in California, and I'm teaching it next week in ABR, the ABR class, Accredited Buyer Rep class, which was one of the first classes created by NAR under the REBAC banner, if you will. And it really was a focus of getting buyer broker agreements back in the day. And one of the things I always do when I'm teaching these classes, wherever I am, is I ask for 2 things from every association. I want to see their purchase agreement. I want to see their buyer broker compensation agreements. And so when I get the opportunity to read them, they're all pretty much, they're very close. You know, some states operate differently, but they're all very close. There is a place where this is what I'm going to get paid for the services I'm going to provide to you. And that's the place where the buyer and the agent can sit down and talk about compensation, can sit down and say, here's what it will be. And that's the place that the buyer, at least in my mind, in these contracts, has the ability to negotiate their commissions all.
Yep, it's there.
That's
Nobody talks
correct.
about it because it's not used. And I'm going to show you something if I have, because we used to call it exclusive authorization to locate property. That was the form. That's what the buyer broker form was called. Exclusive authorization to locate property. And that's what we wanted. We wanted exclusive contracts.
Right.
See, because I propose that the way realtors work, the way real estate professionals work is like this: work for free, 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 close the deal.
Right.
And the reason we work for free is and this is a big problem in the industry to me, is the method of compensation is not effective. It's contingency based.
That's correct.
You only get paid if you close the
And you
deal.
close the deal. That's it.
Right. So you do all this free work to finally get to
Right.
right. And so all of a sudden we have an opportunity we got a form that says you can get an exclusive listing with a buyer. And my buddy Bill Carey and I created this course. It's not available anymore. I just show you it's how to list buyers, because we wanted to convince agents, just like you can get a contract with a seller, you can get a contract with a buyer. Now this is going to date me a little bit.
Well,
they're cassettes.
oh my gosh. I don't have one of those things to play it, but you know, you're absolutely right. And there was a company in Connecticut that I was aware of, and they started, because when you're talking about agency, you're talking about single agency, is dual agency permitted, single agency, sellers only, buyers only, all of that exists, and it's not uncommon. And there was a company in Connecticut that became a single agent just for the buyer sides of the transaction. We will never, they said, we'll never represent a seller. We will only represent buyers. And that was a long time ago. It was very ahead of its time.
Well,
and it did use a contract. But yeah, I mean, that's how.
So we call those people EBAs, exclusive buyer agents, who say, and this is pretty pure, right? I'm not going to take listings. Well, so we have EBAs. These are people that I call them purists. They won't list a property. They only work with buyers.
Right.
I never saw anybody that said we'll only list, but we won't take buyers. I never saw one of those. I have seen people that say we will either list or sell. We do both, but we'll never do a dual agency.
Right, right.
And then we have those people that say we'll list, we'll sell, we'll represent both in a transaction. So are these different models of representation in the industry. And the people you talk about, they were pioneers. They were willing to give up half of the marketplace.
That's exactly right. And they sold it by saying, don't you want to have representation in the transaction? And where the part of the, well, you were aware of the class action that happened that kind of launched the whole agency issue in the first place, where the buyers said, well, I thought they worked for me. I told them things that were confidential. Agents, I mean, I will share with you, I was selling houses in those days, and I guarantee you, I said, well, we have to look at that plumbing problem or the leak on the ceiling, all of which was kind of a violation if I worked for the seller. So it was bad. So I have one last question for you. And I know you're a crystal ball kind of guy. I am a crystal ball kind of gal. I have a thought on where we see this going over the next 24 to 36 months. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that issue. Where do you see this situation happen? Commission compressions happen? What are your thoughts on this based on your knowledge and you know?
Sure. I see that the concept of compressed commissions is going to continue, and commissions are going to start to, they already are, drop in certain areas. I think people are going to have to start to create this idea we've talked about for years called the menu of services.
Yes, a la carte. Right,
which, and whether or not you offer it a la carte, at least it shows a value. You say, here's what we do. We do this and it's worth this much. We do this and we only do them. It's a package deal. Right. So you don't have to offer it a la carte, but you got to show it somehow.
Right.
So I see more people being more definitive in the things that they do. I also see new business models that are coming into the industry. And I also believe that the loan process, that the real estate sales side doesn't exist independently. It exists with this other side, is the lending marketplace.
Right.
And there are certain federal regulations that keeps these things from coming together. But what I see in the future is you might see something called a unified transaction, because everybody's trying to do more things for the consumer. Everybody's trying to bring costs down. And might it bring costs down? And we've always, it's been forbidden. What if the title and the escrow and the sale and the loan could all be handled through one entity?
Blockchain.
And would that reduce cost? And would that, so I see more of that conversation taking place. Another big issue is the way in which we brokers hire agents, the independent contractor aspect. That's been challenged for years. We know that. Who protects us and keeps that in place? Our associations do. Right. People say, what has NAR ever done for me? I said, you like being an independent contractor? What has CAR ever done for me? You like being an independent contractor? Because if you do, the only reason that that's still around is because of our organizations, because the IRS, we're careful not to, aren't we? We say we don't tell people they got to come to meetings. Don't tell people they have to do this, because they're independent contractors. So on the one hand, we treat them as employees. On the other hand, we treat them as independent contractors. The big company that's come out and is really trying on this employee-employer relationship is Redfin.
Right.
Where they actually hire. Well, people will complain about them. They're not, and maybe so. Maybe they're not as experienced, but what they do is they handle a good number of transactions with a lot fewer licensees.
And they also do something very unique, because I've done business with Redfin agents who bought listings of mine. And that agent that was representing the buyer on my listing never had anything to do with the seller. That same buyer who was a seller and needed to sell their house to buy were represented by a different Redfin agent. So they've segregated the services, which is also an interesting point, going back to what we were talking about before, the dual agency issues and so on. And so I agree with you. I think I just did a class. There's a new class that REBI has done that it was the first time I taught it. It was written by a friend of mine out of Washington, Virginia. And it's this real estate assistance, professional assistance class. And of course, I had like 60 students, 56 somewhere in there students. And we went through this whole process, and I said, I don't want you to tell me this, but if you're being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and you're being paid as an independent contractor, that could be an enormous problem for the person paying you, because, and if you're getting bonus by per transaction and don't have a license, that could be a problem for you. You know, and you have to be delicate. But one of the horror stories I heard with my friend Matthew in Virginia, he said there was a guy that there was a bad ending to a relationship with somebody he treated as an employee, but was an independent contractor. And the EDD was brought in, and it cost him $110,000.
Yeah. So we've got this carve out where brokers can hire agents as independent contractors. Now, to me, that's an issue, because if you talk to realtors about other realtors, they complain about one another. It's endless, and about the incompetence, about the fact they don't return phone calls, about all these different things. In my mind, the root of the problem is the employment arrangement.
Right.
If they were employees, brokers would treat them a lot different if they had to pay.
Yeah.
And so, right. And so we see the government, remember, the government is intent upon, at this point, bringing the costs down. And one of the biggest costs in the sale of real estate are the ones that happen between when the property is put on the market and when the loan is placed in the secondary market, right? There's all those costs. And if they could eliminate those costs, and one of the way to take the friction out of the transaction is eliminate the number of people that have to touch it. And if you have employee-employer models, you're actually going to give brokers more responsibility and accountability and tools for accountability. The issue is brokers don't want to do that, because if you had to hire somebody and pay them while they were unproductive,
yeah, you'd be more likely to not have them there anymore.
You would be more likely, and you know what? That would get rid of some of the dead weight. And I say dead weight, I don't have anything. I mean, it's a tough business.
Yes, it is.
And people need to understand it's a very tough business. And so and it makes it even tougher because we're independent contractors. And I often say about realtors, that realtors eat what they kill. Yeah. And it's like, don't talk to me about what's going to happen tomorrow or 5 years from now. I got to worry about what's going to happen tomorrow. Right. And so about what is going to happen over the next couple of years? What are we going to see? Well, I think you need to focus on these areas. You need to focus on the litigation.
Mhm.
You need to focus on the compensation models, and you have to focus on the consumer. And so, what is the real estate consumer of the future going to want? Because
Mm.
that's going to tell you what the real estate industry of the future is going to look like.
Mhm.
It's also going to dictate what the real estate broker of the future is going to do. And it will also indicate what the skill sets are going to be needed from the real estate agent
That's
of the
correct.
future. So
Correct.
I see costs coming down, more automation, possible unified transaction. Um, people, I hate to say this, but the number of people in the industry might decrease,
Mhm.
and that's where we're headed. And so
Uh,
keep in mind what consumers want. This is the biggest thing for me. If you always keep in mind what consumers want, you're going to figure out the model that works best.
That's right.
Consumers want this. They want speed, convenience, choice, value added, quality, service, discounts, and
Mhm.
information. That's what they want. Now, you don't have to give a consumer all of those things. Those are just the things that they want. And if I was selling real estate today and I didn't want a discount, I would stress the other things.
Right. Value
Right?
proposition. Yep.
That's a value
Right,
proposition,
right,
and
right.
I would indicate in my menu of services. And so I think we're going to see in the future people being required to be more specific about the true service that they bring to the consumer.
That's exactly right. And I completely agree with you. Well, my friend, I have to tell you, number one, I adore you, and it's always a tremendous joy for me to spend any time with you at all. I'm grateful I get to see you more frequently. And one of the things I'm probably going to do is think of a few other subjects I think it would be wonderful to talk with you about, if I may, and come back to you and
Sure.
say, let's do this again on maybe a different topic. I will be adding some contact information at the end, but Saul, you're just remarkable. I'm grateful to call you my friend. And I am so grateful that you took a few minutes with me today to talk about changes in the business. It's when you think about how long we've been doing this, I know you beat me, but I've got almost 36 years. That's a long time. And I love having students in classes that weren't born when I started in real estate. So, and that happens, my friend. So thank you, Saul, so very much. I appreciate you so much. And
Well,
I'll be in touch.
likewise, Jenny, let me just say that one of the great benefits of being in the real estate industry for an extended period of time is the ability to create relationships like we
Yeah,
have.
yeah,
The fact that we have very good friends, even if we don't see them
that's
as
right.
often as we'd like to, this industry runs deep.
Yep,
And there are a lot of things that we hold dear, and it's always great to talk to you. And I'll do it anytime. You just let me know.
you got it. Thank you, my friend. Take good care.
You too.